So today, I took a little bit longer on announcements because I needed to fill some time because I realized this week that, I thought, man, my sermon came together really fast this week. I kind of have a process of how I write it out, and then I convert it into much larger text so I can read it as I'm giving it to you. And I realized that I wrote my sermon in a much larger text than what I usually do. So I thought, wow, I got finished really fast, but it was in a lot larger text. So we might get out of here a little bit early today. I know everybody is going to be disappointed, right? It's my end of the year gift to you. No, today is the day that we bring some things to an end. It's the end of our Christmas season. I know some of you may have packed up your Christmas trees, all your decorations already, got it away. You're done with Christmas. You guys are Scrooges, right? You guys are ready for Christmas to move on for some reason. No, it's also the end of the year. Like I said, it's hard to believe that 2023 has come to an end already. It's also the end of our sermon series called Set Apart. And this was a series that originally was not even meant to be a sermon series. It was meant to be one sermon about this idea of us being set apart. But I felt God very strongly pressing it on me to this. We need to talk more about this. And that's what we have done. I think it's been good for us, a time to examine, to ask God to search our hearts for what is your plan? What's his plan for us? What's his plan for me, for each one of us? And we've looked at passages that are built around that from the Bible in our series. And we've learned that he has set each one of us apart. He set you apart. He set me apart for certain things, for particular things, for a plan, for a purpose. In fact, not only has he set you apart, he's created you, designed you not by accident, but on purpose. That's the thing we've been saying in this series, on purpose, for a purpose. There is no accident about you. The way that you've been designed, the way that you have been created, the situations that you've faced in this life, it has been on purpose, all hoping that it will build for the purpose that God has for our lives. He's designed you on purpose for a purpose. God has worked all of those things together in such a way that it's prepared you to live out the purpose for your life. And your purpose, as we've talked about over these last weeks, your purpose will always glorify God. The purpose that God has for your life now, later, overall in life, is all meant to glorify God. Because whether it's the purpose for your life or, again, the purpose just for the moment, for today, for right now even, is always meant to glorify him, because you may not know what the big purpose for your life, the calling over your life is yet. God, he didn't reveal mine to me until I was in my 30s. I know people who knew their purpose much earlier in life than that. I've known people who found it much later in life than that. The thing is, whether you know your purpose or you're waiting for God to reveal it to you, it's all about working towards that purpose. Living in that purpose, working towards finding that purpose. And that's all about being righteous. You see, your purpose is directly related to your righteousness. Your purpose in life is directly related to your righteousness. Zechariah and Elizabeth, we looked at them a few weeks ago. They were found to be righteous in God's sight. Joseph was found to be righteous in God's sight. Mary was described as being blessed and highly favored in God's sight, which means they were way up here when it came to being righteous, right? I mean, if the Bible describes them as being righteous, they were righteous. And in that righteousness, in that right way of living, in their relationship with God, which meant they didn't have anything ahead of him in their lives, they got the purpose for their lives. Your purpose is directly related to your righteousness. Because they were righteous, because they were living that out in their lives every day, because they had God where he demands to be at in our lives, at the very top, in the forefront of everything they did. Because remember, God doesn't take a back seat to anyone or anything. You see, God knew because they had him where he was supposed to be in their lives. He knew what the answer would be when he came and said, here's the thing I want you to do. Here's your purpose. He knew that their answer would be yes. You see, you may want to know the purpose for your life, what God has for you, what it is that he's created you for and designed you specifically for, and the thing that will ultimately bring that sense of fulfillment and satisfaction to your life. Do you know what it is? I hope that you do. I hope that you want to know what it is. If you don't know yet, God hopes that you do as well. Here's the thing, though. Here's the question that God needs you to wrestle with a little bit this morning. Are you ready for your purpose? Are you ready yet for your purpose? Are you spiritually ready for your purpose? Which is another way of asking, if God were to reveal the purpose to you for your life, would you say yes? Or would you hear it and say, yeah, there's no way I'm doing that. God, you've got this all wrong. You've got me mixed up with somebody else. I don't even want to do that. That sounds awful. That sounds like it would be the worst. Very often, the things that God calls us to are the very opposite of what typically sounds good to us. And so what God does is he starts small with us. That's why your whole relationship with God, we describe it as a journey. The Apostle Paul, he described it as a race, which was an endurance race, not just a sprint. He encourages us as Christians to train for the race, to run the race well, and to ultimately finish the race well. And in that training, he tells us that as young Christians, as baby Christians, he describes it, to start with spiritual milk, to learn the basic truths about what it means to live a Christian life. And that's where God will start with you in order to reveal your purpose for you, the true meaning for your life. He'll start small. He'll give you small tests to see where you're at in that right relationship with him. And those tests, they might include tests of your patience. That's the one we all really like, right? Tests of your patience. It might include tests of your joy, tests of your self-control, tests of your peace or your kindness. Because in those tests, he's looking to see if you'll turn to him, or if you'll turn to yourself, or turn to others for answers. Those things that you have happen in your life, the things that you might wish weren't happening, you might wish were different or would stop or go away. They might just be happening to reveal to God how it is that you'll respond to them, which in turn reveals to God how you'll likely respond to what it is that he has set apart for you in your life. Those moments when the person in your life deserves the harsh words, but you turn the other cheek and respond with love. That tells God that you're growing in your relationship with him, right? Those moments when you become determined to put him first over other activities, over relationships, over your job or your money. Those moments tell God that you're growing in your relationship with him. And you've been saying yes to all of those moments, right? Haven't we all? Oh, you haven't. Well, I have good news for you if you haven't been saying yes to God in all of those little moments, those moments of frustration, those moments that you wish were different. I have good news for you because it's okay. And here's why it's okay. We all fail the test sometimes. And what does a failed test reveal to us? It simply reveals the things that we lack, the things that need to be different, the things that we haven't learned how to do yet, haven't set in yet, hasn't clicked yet. And we all have areas in our lives that are lacking when it comes to relationship with God. There are always things that we can work on. There are always things that we can hand over to him. That's why it's so important that we regularly allow God to look at our hearts, to examine our hearts, reveal to us those areas where we're falling short in our relationship with him, areas where we've been failing a test. And once you start passing those tests, your level of righteousness will increase in God's sight, which will place you on the path to discovering his purpose then for your life. And it will also set you up then to say yes to that purpose. So this morning, we're going to look at a group of men in the Bible who we get a small look into their lives, a kind of glimpse at a very particular moment in their lives. And in this moment of their lives, we see not necessarily the purpose, the big purpose for their lives, but a purpose that was for a moment in their lives. This morning, we're going to look at Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. Matthew chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. It says, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea, in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him. When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. So he assembled all the chief priests and scribes of the people and asked them where the Christ would be born. In Bethlehem of Judea, they told him, because this is what was written by the prophet. And you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, because out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel. Then Herod secretly summoned the wise men, asked them the exact time the star appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, go and search carefully for the child. When you find him, report back to me so that I too can go and worship him. After hearing the king, they went on their way. And there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary, his mother. Falling to their knees, they worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures, presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their own country by another route. These wise men, as we like to call them, they're sort of a misunderstood group of men in the Bible, and especially when it comes to this Christmas series. They're often depicted in the nativity scene. Maybe you set one out at home. They're depicted as three men, which you might have noticed. Our passage of Scripture did not tell us how many of these men there were. All it says is there was at least more than one to make men, right? It wasn't the wise man. Over the many years since this passage took place, we traditionally think of there being three of them because of the gifts that they brought. They brought three with them. But there's another interesting element to these men that gets often misunderstood. They were not at the birth of Jesus. So again, that nativity scene where you get Mary and Joseph around the manger, and then you get the shepherds and maybe you have the animals that were around in your nativity scene, and then around the very edge you have the wise men, and maybe their camels were there. These three men, however many of them there were not at the birth of Jesus. In fact, it was most likely maybe even up to 2 years after Jesus had been born that these men finally found him. And now, this is a freebie for you this week. You have to be careful about believing the things that you hear about the Bible, because they may not be what the Bible actually says. And it's really important that you know the truth of what the Bible actually says. Now, these wise men, again, whether there were 3 of them or there were 100 of them, these men had a purpose to fulfill. These men were not Jewish men. They were likely from Persia, likely from a group called the Magi, and they were depicted as being wise because they were educated. These were learned men. As part of this group called the Magi, they would have looked for higher learning anywhere, any place that they could, which would have led them to astrology, which is where they found this special star, a star that would lead them to where Jesus was. And in their journey to get to Jesus, there are 3 key lessons that I want us to look at, want to help you, that will help you discover or live within the purpose that God has for you and your life. And here's the first one about this passage of Scripture about these wise men. The news of Jesus will be deeply disturbing to some. The very news of Jesus in all of its forms and all of its ways of getting that news will be deeply disturbing to some. Look at verses 1 through 3 with me again. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of King Herod, wise men from the east arrived in Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he who has been born King of the Jews? For we saw his star at its rising and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was deeply disturbed, and all of Jerusalem with him. The news of Jesus will be deeply disturbing to some. In this passage, we see these wise men go to the most likely place where Jesus would have been, at least to them, the place that would have made the most sense to find him. They interpreted this star that they had found to represent the birth of a king. In particular, the king of the Jews, the king of this group of people. Now, we don't know how all of that came to be. We don't know how they made the connection from a star to a newborn king. But here's what I can tell you. God can work in whatever way that he chooses to work. And that goes for our lives as well. In this passage, it's really a tale of three different perspectives to this news of Jesus. There are three sides. There's the wise men, there's King Herod, and then there's Jerusalem as a city. Two of these three sides were not Jewish, the wise men and Herod, and only one of the three sides responded by not being deeply disturbed at the news of Jesus. It was the wise men, right? The group of wise men. You see, the news of Jesus will disturb those who are threatened by Jesus. And that's because Jesus brings change to our lives. The news of a new king for Herod, for the Jewish people in Jerusalem, that was scary to them because that was going to affect their immediate lives. The wise men didn't have a whole lot of skin in the game. They were there to worship him, to get to him, to give him these presents, and then leave. They weren't disturbed by the news of Jesus. The ones whose lives was going to change the most were deeply disturbed. Because Jesus, even the very news of Jesus, brings change to lives. The news of Jesus being presented to some for the very first time demands a decision. Will you choose Jesus or not? Will you submit your life to him or say no? Will you submit your life to his ways, to his commands, or not? Will you say yes to the purpose that he has for you or not? Will you say yes to those small things, those small steps of faith along the way that are meant to get you closer to that purpose? Or will you say no? Jesus brings change to our lives. These wise men were moved to action by the news of Jesus. King Herod, along with the rest of Jerusalem, were moved to fear at the news of Jesus. They didn't understand what was happening, and they didn't seek to understand either. And that's a mistake that we as people very often make. We don't understand Jesus. We don't understand the things of Jesus, the news of Jesus, the ways of Jesus, or what he asks of our lives. And because we don't understand it, we then allow ourselves to be disturbed by it. And one of the ways that you can be disturbed by it is simply by being unsure about it. You see, the purpose that God has for you, whether that's for your life or just for the moment, can cause you to be unsure. The things that he set you apart for, whether it's over your whole life or just for that moment, can cause you to be very unsure about it. And that's because God won't give you all the answers for it right away. Instead, there will be that measure of faith that will be required. And what's faith? Hebrews 11:1 tells us that faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we don't see. We as people are very unsure about the things that we can't see. We're very unsure about things that haven't happened yet. And yet that's the very thing that God is all about. We can't see God, yet we're called to know that he exists, that he cares for us, that he loves us, provides for us, has a plan for us. You see, it's okay for you to be unsure for a moment, but that moment must be a fleeting moment. where your uncertainty, you allow God to transform that into great faith. God's hope is that as you grow in your relationship with him, your faith in him will grow as well. Again, it's what those baby steps, the tests that he puts before us, it's what they're for. Because as you place your faith in him, in the smaller things, you'll be much more likely to automatically place your faith in him with the really big things too. Like the very thing that he sets you apart for in your life. So that's the first lesson from the wise men's story. The news of Jesus will be disturbing to some. Here's the second. God's purpose for you will include worship. God's purpose for your life will include worship. Verses 9 through 10 say this: after hearing the king, they went on their way, and there it was, the star they had seen at its rising. It led them until it came and stopped above the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overwhelmed with joy. Entering the house, they saw the child with Mary his mother. Falling to their knees, they worshiped. God's purpose will include worship. We are to worship God. Doesn't matter the circumstances, doesn't matter the situations, the hardships, the struggles of your journey. We are called to worship God. You see, we're supposed to have the exact same reaction that these wise men had when they found Jesus, being overwhelmed with joy. Herod, when he got the news of Jesus, he was not overwhelmed with joy. Jerusalem, at the news of Jesus, at the news of this new king, was not overwhelmed with joy. It says they were disturbed. They responded out of their fear. Herod tried to set a trap for them to lead him to Jesus, not so he could worship him, so he could eliminate him. The news of Jesus, Jesus in your life, is meant to produce faith, joy, and worship. These wise men, they worshiped in the ways that they knew how. I don't believe that they knew that this was the Son of God. They didn't know that he was this Messiah, this fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. They didn't know he was going to be Savior of the world. They simply knew that he was a king, and they worshiped him as they would a king. For us, we know who Jesus is. We know who he is. We know he's the Son of God. We know he's our Savior. We know that the grave could not hold him. And we know that he still lives and reigns as king today. And at that news, we're meant to be overwhelmed with joy that he desires to have a relationship with us. Overwhelmed with joy that he has plans, that he has a purpose for our lives. Overwhelmed with joy that he hasn't forsaken us and he won't forsake us, even though that's exactly what we deserve. Overwhelmed with joy, brought to our knees in worship at the goodness of God. We are meant to worship him. Our purpose for our lives, we are meant to worship him no matter the circumstances, no matter the situation, no matter the hardship, no matter the journey. We are meant to worship God. Those are the first two lessons from these wise men. Here's the third. God's purpose, his purposes, will demand sacrifices. The end of verse 11 says this: Then they opened their treasures, presented him with gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. The purpose that God had for them, which may not have even been the overall purpose for their lives, the purpose he had for them in the moment required great sacrifice of them. It required a really long journey. There are estimates that it maybe took them around 6 months to get from Persia to Jesus. Other estimates say it took over 2 years to get there. Either way, that's a really long time. I've never taken a 6-month trip, let alone a 2-year trip. It wouldn't have been easy. It wouldn't have been safe. Plus, they had to go back, right? A great sacrifice of time, of hardship on a tough journey. God's purpose, even in the smaller purposes, will require you to make sacrifices. It could simply be a sacrifice to turn the other cheek in a situation where it would be much easier and seemingly make you feel much better to tell that person, give them exactly what they deserve. It's a sacrifice to go the extra mile for someone who would never do the same thing for you. It's a sacrifice to show love to those who do not show it back, to show patience to those who don't deserve it, to display peace instead of wrath, to extend gentleness instead of anger, to show kindness instead of giving others exactly what they deserve. God's purposes, even in the smaller ones, the smaller moments, everyday moments, require sacrifice on our part. You see, there are costs to following Jesus. The gift of salvation is free, which means that there's nothing you can do to earn it. You simply have to accept it. But there are costs to following Jesus. The wise men, they gave things to Jesus and his earthly family that were very costly to them. I don't know anybody running around giving away gold for free. They gave gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Even the frankincense and myrrh, these herbs and spices, these perfumes were at least as valuable as gold in that time, if not more. They didn't just give one of them to Jesus. They could have said, here's some gold. They could have said, here's some frankincense or some myrrh. They gave all three of them to him. A relationship with Jesus is one that says, everything that I have belongs to you, Jesus. If you ask me of my talents, I'll give to you all that I have. If you ask me of my time, I'll give to you all that I have. If you ask me of my gold, I'll give it to you. If my frankincense, my myrrh, I will give you all that I have. Because none of what you have is supposed to be off limits to Jesus. You see, we often in life hold back from God. We hold back the things that ultimately we hold dear. It might be your time. We want to do other things than what God wants us to do with our time. It might be your money, it might be a lifestyle, it could be anything. But none of what you have is supposed to be off limits to God. To say, use this thing for me, or to say, hand this thing over to me because you're not supposed to have it any longer. The wise men, what's interesting is that they found Jesus where they didn't expect him to be. Even though they had the star leading their way, leading them to where he was at, they went to where it would have made the most sense for him to be. Because remember, who was it that they were searching for? They were searching for a new king who had been born. And in their minds, where would this king be at? He would be at the palace. That's not where he was at. Instead, the star led them to a humble home as part of a very humble family. And the wise men, when they got there, when they went to the palace, found out he was not there, told that he was in Bethlehem, and they went there, they followed the star. They could have walked up on that humble home as part of that humble family, seen their circumstances, their situation, and said, wait a second, this can't be right. He's not in the palace. His parents aren't royalty. We've made a big mistake. And at finding Jesus where he was at, where they least expected him, the natural thing for them would have been to leave with their gifts because Jesus was not who they expected him to be. As believers, as Christians, that's very often what we do. We expect to find Jesus in the palace, expect him to give us all that we want. And when he doesn't, we get angry, right? We believe that maybe we've made a mistake and walk away from the things that Jesus has for us. Sometimes even walk away from the very purpose that he has for us. You see, following Jesus, really, truly following him as his disciple, means it will be a life of sacrifice. But I can tell you this, whatever it might cost, there'll be no greater joy. There'll be no greater sense of fulfillment in your life than you know that you are doing the thing that God has created you to do. Though it may lead to a different life than you expected, there will be no greater joy no greater sense of fulfillment than for you to do the very thing that God has designed you for, has created you for. And it just might start with you saying yes to him in the smallest of ways today. If you would stand with me, Denise, if you would come in this time of response. We learn that the news of Jesus can sometimes be disturbing, can sometimes make us feel unsure. And whatever it is that God is asking of you today to say yes to, it could be the purpose for your life, the big thing that he's created you for. It could be something small of saying, you know what, I need to start being kind. I need to forgive someone. I need to hand this thing over to him. I need to start placing him at the very top of my life. The news of that can make us unsure, can make us uneasy because we can't see how it'll all work out just yet. I like to think of it as a flashlight faith. We don't know all of the steps, but God reveals the next step that we're supposed to take. He hasn't shined the light on all of it yet, just that next step. Friends, would you take that next step, whatever that is, in your life, in your relationship with him today? If you would bow your heads and close your eyes for just a moment and just simply ask God, what step are you asking me to take? Is our lives, it's meant to be more of him and less of us, in that relationship with him. What's the thing, God, that you're asking us to hand over to you? It could be accepting Christ, that free gift, for the very first time. It could be making a new commitment to him, to say, I've accepted you, but I haven't been living my life for you. I've been putting things in the way of you. It could just be simply saying, him telling you, you need to live out the fruit of the Spirit. Your life, it's not showing any joy. You're not loving others well. There's no peace. There's no patience. Father, this morning, whatever it is that you're asking of us, Father, my hope is that it would not be disturbing to us, that we would not be unsure, but instead we would be hopeful. We would place our faith in you and we would say yes. Even though it might seem like a great sacrifice, Father, the blessings that you have for us far outweigh whatever we can give. Father, would you turn our eyes, turn our hearts to you, the things that you desire of us. Folks, over these next few moments, as Denise plays and sings, if there's anything that you need prayer about this morning, I would love to pray with you. The altar is open over these next few moments.